Man, is there anything better looking and sounding than inline fours, guys? We got one in here today, 07R6. We got some forks that are leaking, brake pads that are saturated, and we also got a knock in the front end he wants us to check out. Almost sounds to me like this whole head's loose, so we'll check the preload on that bearing. We already got a spread of every tool I think we're gonna need. Take this front end apart. Over here, we already got all of our fork stuff laid out, kit, brake pads, nothing to it but to do it. Let's go! All right, first things first, we already got this thing up on the neck stand. We got to bust off these tree clamps, go ahead and get our clip-ons off, all that stuff, the whole 9 yards, and see if we can drop these forks out of here. So let's get our retainer. Got two nuts there. It's kind of a retainer that locks it in to keep it from spinning once you lock them into each other. We got a special tool just for those. So, oh, you know what? Look, it's already hand loose, which is not the greatest. So I think my suspicion might be a little bit right here. Let's go ahead and check our tension on that. All right, our normal spline too that fits on there, like this, is not deep enough to set on the other one, so we had to get out our big boy. Yeah, I'd say that's might be the majority where our knock's coming from. Okay. Either way, that's not as tight as we would want it. So with that snugged up, go ahead and get the rest of these triple clamps loosened on the lower end and take the rest of our forks out. All right, with our forks off there, we're going to go ahead and get this in the vise. We'll put our soft jaws in here so we don't mar up those tubes. This will keep us from marring up that real thin aluminum tube. Keep them looking pretty. So we'll cinch this down in here. I'm going to go ahead and run our compression adjustment cap all the way back. We also are going to go ahead and take all of our preload off. If you look real close on here, when I actually run this down, it's not moving the inside, it's actually moving this tube right here, this silver one, which is what puts preload on our spring inside. So we're going to go ahead and back it all the way out. If you see that this takes the tension off of our spring, well, when we take it apart, we don't have as much spring tension. All right, so with that off, bust open our tube cap. Easy as that. These forks are a little bit different than any other type of inverted fork because they got this external cartridge on the bottom. So it's a little bit different of a process on these forks specifically. All right, with our tube loose, get this out of the vise here. Go ahead and puke some of this fluid out. So drain what we got going on. After this drains this first part out here, we're going to go ahead and bust off this head cap and use our spring compression tool to pull that down. Then we'll go ahead and purge the rest of this fluid out. All right, let's go ahead and get this back in the vise. Take our soft jaws out of here. All right. Now what we're looking at up here, this is our spring, our internal spring, and then we got our spring spacer. Our spring spacer, we got a couple holes here, and we'll use our spring compression tool so we can actually get to the underneath side of this head to take it apart. So these rods will go in here. This is a manual one. They do have some that go in the vise, but they're a lot more expensive. And if you got the muscle and the coordination, these work just fine. So with that in there, we're going to go ahead and get our 17 and our 19 ready to bust this cap off. So let's go ahead and pull this down. You'll see a gap underneath there. We'll go ahead and put our holding tool underneath of there to hold it for us. We'll get our 19 millimeter on the bottom of this nut. Then on our preload adjuster up top, that 17 that we had, go ahead and bust this loose. All right. With that busted loose, go ahead and pull our spring tension down with our tool, holding our wrench at the same time, and take this cap all the way off. Go ahead and pull out our dampening rod, which is really long. Set that over here. Now, the only other thing we need to get off there is our nut that holds it on. So we'll pull that down, thread this off by hand. Then we can remove our spring compression tool. Since we shouldn't have any more, there we go. And that's where that spring rests. So we don't have any more spring tension inside. All right, get our spring compression tool off there. Just pull it up with this spacer cup. We'll leave it on there since we don't need to do anything else with it. Get this back out of the vise. Go ahead and get this over here with the rest of the stuff draining. So we're going to pull this entire spring out. Get it in our pan to dry, or drain, rather. Now, this tube can go ahead and slide right off, this whole outer tube. Just like that. We'll let that sit here and drain upside down for a second. Now, our dampening rod that's on the inside, you can see it's still got fluid in it, which is letting it dampen. So with this upside down, go ahead and let any other stuff drain. And as we move this dampening rod in and out, you can actually hear it sucking air, pushing fluid out of there. If you also notice, what came off of my fingers is the spring base spacer. So won't forget to put that back in there. All right, sounds like we're just sucking mainly air now. So now we're going to get this back in the vise. And what we're going to worry about next is on the bottom of this fork, we have our compression cartridge. Now, our compression cartridge, most other traditional forks don't have this, but our compression cartridge needs to come out so we can actually get all the rest of the dirty fluid where this stuff sits. So we will take this off. So we're going to hold a little bit of also thumb tension on this. Most generally, they do not pop out, but depending on where you have this adjusted, can, on the very last bit, have a little bit of a pop. So we just don't want it to go flying, which normally it won't, but just in case. And you'll see what I'm talking about, how this reservoir cup on this cartridge is actually going to hold the rest of the dampening fluid, and we'll have to purge that out as well. So, okay. All right. Here's our compression cartridge. So yeah, some old fluid on there. We'll spray that off and clean it. Leave this over here to drain a little bit. Now, if you see we got some fluid, we'll go back to this drain pan. And when I dump this out, now I'm going to move this rod. And every time I'm moving this rod, it's puking that old gross fluid out. And you can see how dirty it is against that tube. And the first stuff we poured out was kind of clear. Like I said, guys, that's where all that nasty fluid is sitting. It's down in the bottom, just because that's where it relaxes. So now with our dampening rod, you see how floppy it is because it's not purged, doesn't have any fluid in it. So we'll leave this here to drain the rest of the way upside down while we work on our outer fork tube, getting these seals out of here. All right, with our tube sitting over here, we'll get our soft jaws back in here. Guys, if you don't have soft jaws, something nylon, like I said before in other videos, even this stuff like this will work. It's really, really dense foam. It's just something to keep it from marring up. We don't need a lot of pressure on these. You can obviously tell somebody's already had these tubes in there and marred them up before. So it wasn't me. I always try to use soft jaws. So get this in the vise here. And we don't need, I mean, just that much tension, enough to where it's not going to go anywhere. So inside of here, if we look in the top, we're going to have, this is our wiping seal. I'm just going to pry up on that, get it out of there. Now inside here, we have our actual tube seal. It's held in by this retaining ring. We'll get this pulled out of there. Watch your eyes, make sure it don't fly apart. Now our other seal, just going to pry up really easy. And if we're using a screwdriver or something like that, make sure you're not digging into the side of this tube. We don't want to put any lines on. So just barely grab the edge of it, and it should come up fairly easy. See it starting to move. Now, if it doesn't, we can put a little bit of heat around here, just a tad bit, and it'll make it walk the rest of the way up. But it seems like it's coming out just fine for us, just like that. So I'm not putting a bunch of crazy tension on there. Just take your time, work it around. The most important thing is we don't want to mar the inside of this tube. So looks like we're pretty much out. All right, there we go. Inside of here, we also have the seal base. Also important, this seal base has a square side and a rounded side. That rounded edge is always going to face the seal so we don't get any cutting. So let's remember that. All right, we'll go ahead and clean this out. Wipe it out. Another thing to remember when we're doing these forks, we want to use something that's pretty much lint-free. Microfibers, shop towels, something like that. Get a bunch of lint in there can actually hinder us from sealing in the future. So go ahead and spray any gross debris we have out of here. Give ourselves a good eyeball through it. Make sure we're not seeing anything. This tube looks free and clear for us. So that's great. We'll let this sit here and dry for a second. We'll pay a little bit of attention to our inner. So while we have it apart, now's the best time. We're going to hose this down from any road debris, brake dust, grime. Careful not to spray it too much in our cartridge reservoir. We will clean that out with just a little bit of fluid, but we don't want to fill it up. Stuff like brake cleaner makes our O-rings on our cartridge swell. It can really not be good for us. So, like I said, with a microfiber, we'll wipe this completely clean. Also checking for any nicks in your tube here. We'll give it a spot as the seal passes by it to leave a little bit of fluid to come by. So most generally we don't see that on road bikes, street bikes, things of that sort, mostly on our dirt bikes, off-road machines and things like that. But always want to look no matter what. So looks like we are pretty solid on this. We see a couple striation marks, which is just from dirty seals. If the camera's going to pick that up, it's a little bit of lines, a little bit of linear strikes on that. Nothing too crazy. Should seal just fine for us. So. All right, we're going to spray reservoir cup out just a tad bit, not a bunch. We don't want it to get in our cartridge hole. So that's good. Dry this off. We can go ahead and put our cartridge back in this fork lower. All checking our cartridge right here on the edge. We also want to make sure we don't have anything that's cut on our seals, which looks good to us. If we was doing a full rebuild on this, we would change these seals, tube bushings, springs. There's a bunch of stuff inside of here and everything, but most generally these are okay. So we already got that cleaned off. Go ahead and get this back in the cartridge hole. Like I was saying before, it has just a tiny bit of tension right before it stings. So we're going to push down with our thumb, get it to start by hand. There it goes. And as it starts by hand, we'll finish her off with this wrench. Guys, these tubes, you're talking about aluminum, magnesium, some titanium parts in certain aspects of other manufacturers. So always check your torque specs. Don't be go cranking these things down. We don't want to mar up threads. These things will split easier than you think. So get that good and snug. All right. So with that cleared off, we're going ahead and put our wiper on first. We got a couple seals right from Yamaha. We're only using OEM on this one. So get our two seals out. First seal being our wiper. It's going to retain in that fork tube. And the next one being our inner seal. So inner seal, we have a little spring, little silver spring that's on the inside of there. This side doesn't. Spring always usually faces the fluid side. So remember that when we put in as well. Or just remember what way you took it off. So we'll get ourselves a little bit of seal grease here. And we're going to use some of the Race Tech slick stuff. Stuff's really good. Go ahead and lube our inside of our seal up a little bit. Doesn't have to be crazy, just something to keep us from chafing until the fluid gets down there and wear, and also gives us a little bit of a protection barrier. Okay, so go ahead and slide this on our tube all the way down to the bottom, which is also why we want to make sure this is super clean down there on the bottom when we clean that off. We don't want any dirt on there. That's ready to assemble, so we'll go ahead and swap by stuff again. Get our tube back in here and our jaws, soft jaws once again. We'll go ahead and load this back up with our new seals. Okie doke. So if you remember, we was talking about that seal base. Got that rounded side on this side, a little bit sharper edge on that side. We're going to put that rounded side facing our seal. So that just drops in there. Simple as that. Same thing with our new seal. That rubber or that spring that's on the inside there is going to face our fluid, which is that way. Go ahead and pre-grease this up with our Race Tech. Nothing crazy, just enough to get us a little bit of a protection barrier on there on a dry tube. So you can also even put a little bit on the outside just to help us go in, as that clip is going to retain it for us. All right. With that started, squared up by hand, go ahead and make sure we're going straight in. All right. And once we get to there, I always like to try to push them first on this outer edge and see if I can walk them in by hand instead of driving them in. And if so, we'll do it that way. And if not, there it goes. So we're just going to make sure we retain evenness as we're going down. And if not, we can take our seal driving tool that's like this. Typically, this is for dirt bikes or whatever. We put this around the fork tube on there and drive the seal down. But the same principle, we can use that and any type of socket or something like that, since it isn't going to keep us centered. We found a socket that fits just inside our tube here. Perfect. So we'll go ahead and tap this until we feel it bottom out. And we hear that difference when we drive it in the sound. That lets us know we're bottomed out. And we're definitely below our ring, our retention ring groove on the inside, being right here. This little recess is what's going to keep our keeper ring in there. So we'll walk our keeper ring in there. That's going to retain our seal from coming out. Now, dirt bikes and stuff like that, we'd go ahead and put our wiper on, since this is a little bit of a different style fork. Remember, we already put it on our lower leg over here. So now we're ready to go ahead and reassemble this, get some fluid in it. Get our fork bottom leg back in here. And snugged up. Okay. Now what we want to be cautious about is when we walk this on there, we don't want to push too hard. This one particularly has a tapered end, which is a little bit smaller. If we was doing other type of forks, we'd use what's called a seal bullet. And this will go over the top and it would help kind of our seal ride on instead of trying to catch an edge there. So with this, we should be fine though. So we'll just set it on there, find center, walk it around. You can almost feel that seal open up as it goes on there. That's perfect. We'll go all the way down to our wiper. And our wiper is going to just press right in there. Usually goes by hand. If not, you can take you a screwdriver and push up on it just to make sure we don't have any gap going all the way across. We want this seal closed right there. So go ahead and clean off our bottom leg one more time just to make sure we don't have any debris there as we set this down so we can fill it up with fluid and put all of our stuff back together. All right, next, see this dampening rod just falls because we don't have any fluid in it. So we're going to go ahead and pre-fill our tube up, and then we'll check final level first after we go ahead and bleed this out. So go ahead and dump us some fluid in there, just enough to it can start bubbling out. Okay, and then we're going to, if you guys remember our spring base, make sure it's centered, drop it on there. And then we're going to take our spring that's been draining and cleaned. This spring has a tapered side, smaller on top, bigger on bottom. The tapered side on this particular application goes on top. So we'll go ahead and drop that in there. And guys, we want to check our fork fluid level with this spring and components inside. So to do that, we're going to fill this up, not all the way. We can always suck it out, which is what we're going to end up doing anyway, just to make sure that it's what we need. So now we want to grab our dampening rod that's on the inside, which is just right there. Pull it up. Now, see, it's just falling if I let it go. So what we need to do is cycle this and bleed all the air through the system of our cartridge until we start feeling resistance on here. And you will know because when we pull this up and drop it, it'll be falling slowly. Okay. Pull this spring out here for a second just till we get done purging. And we'll put that back in there before we measure. That way we can grab it easier. And you can feel it. See, it's starting to just drops and it starts. See how it's kind of erratic? So it's bleeding the air out of it. So we're just going to cycle this up and down, up and down. It usually takes, I don't know, 10, 20 times till we start feeling resistance all the way up and all the way down. Once we do that, we'll give it another about 10 pumps once we are feeling resistance. And just to double check that we are completely bled, once we raise this all the way up after we pump it, we're going to let it drop and make sure it drops smoothly and non-erratic. So that's looking beautiful. And that's what gives us our dampening. So we'll go ahead and throw our dampening rod back in our center hole because we'll need that for measurement. And you can also see how that goes down slowly and the fluid's just kind of holding it. So we'll bleed that out of any air as well. Excuse me. Now we can check our fluid level. So with our dampening rod down there on the bottom, our spring in the hole, what we got here is a rod with a stopper on it. Now, stock specs for this is 110 millimeters from base, top of the tube coming down. So from the top of the tube down, it's going to be 110 millimeters, and that's where we want our fluid level after our dampener rod's already bled. So we already have our dampening rod bled. This is set to 110 millimeters. We're going to drop this right on the top as it goes in. That's set at 110 millimeters. And we're going to take our syringe and suck and see if we get any fluid. And we're not, which means we need to add more fluid. So let's go ahead and top off some more. It's probably going to need some more than that, but we'll go ahead and just check anyway. And we'll suck. Same thing, nothing. So we're still not even up to our level where we should be. Dump some more in there. Like I said, it doesn't really matter if we overfill it as long as it's not coming over the top. Oh, just like I just did. We'll catch this as it goes down. We won't get our stuff dirty. Hey, at least we know it's full. So anyway, what we're going to do, that gives you a good example of when that's all the way full, just so we're sure of where our level is at. This is on a suction tube, and it's going to suck our level down. You can picture that being on the inside, right to where it should be. So, well, sometimes you make messes. It's fine. All right, now with that thing in there, go ahead and suck out anything that's extra until we suck air. So once we start sucking air, we know that our level is right where it should be. This is difficult to do with one hand. There we go. And sometimes it just takes a lot of pressure to pull on this, and we'll see it'll start sucking air here. There we go. See, now we're sucking air. So that lets us know we're right at the level of where this can't suck any more fluid. So just to verify, we'll push some of this back in and suck some back out until it sucks air. We know we're right where we need to be. There we go. All right. Another trick for you guys too. If for some reason you don't have that tool, can't afford that tool or whatever, most people have a tape measure. Take a zip tie, measure off whatever your specs is, and then mark your zip tie, stick it down in there, and use it like a dipstick. Works the same, guys. You don't always have to have the fancy tools to make it happen, but they do help out when you do this more times than one. But you're hobbying around, got some forks you need to rebuild on your bike. I understand not wanting to buy a tool for a one-time thing or once every couple year thing. So keep that in mind. You don't always have to have that. So just use a zip tie and use it as a dipstick. All right, grabbing our damper rod. We're going to need to keep this up from when we put on our cap, because this just falls back down in there and we can't retain ownership of it. So, all right, with that up, going to go ahead and put back on our spring spacer. And as soon as we do this, we're going to need to grab that rod from the top. Okay, we got it. So we're going to push down a little bit, and we're going to run this nut all the way down to the very, very bottom. And then we'll back run it to our cartridge when we get it on there. So let's run this all the way on without letting it fall in our tube. All right, that stops there. We'll put our retaining piece underneath of there so it doesn't fall down for us. Great. And that's going to hold it on there so our spring can't go past it. So now, putting on this cap so that we have enough adjustment for what we're doing with that damper rod, we're going to go ahead and back our adjuster all the way out, which we already did. So stock spec for this fork is right around 50 clicks. So we're going to go ahead and run this in 50 clicks. Then we're going to run this piece down on there, and wherever it stops, then we'll run our jam nut up to it. So that's what gives us how many clicks we have on here. So with it backed all the way out, let's go ahead and run this in 50 clicks. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. So with that set at 50, which is our stock specs, we're going to go ahead and run this on there. Keep in mind too, right in between this retaining nut, there is a little thrust washer that usually stays on here, but if it does come off, it does need to go in between there. So now with this, we're going to just run this down pretty much by hand until it bottoms out and stops. And that's going to stop against our adjuster that we just ran in, which is right. So we got some more space. That's what we don't need. This needs to be ran all the way down first. There we go, just like that. And then with this running in, now it stops. So you see how I'm starting to turn it? So now what we're going to do is get our 19 underneath of here, run this piece, hold it still, and run our jam nut up to it. That'll lock in our adjustment at a maximum of 50 clicks. So with this held on the top still, we're going to run our jam nut in to where it hits our cap and not the other way around. All right, now with that starting to feel snug, we're going to go ahead and snug it up the rest of the way. But before we do that, we're going to take our adjuster out a little bit. That way it's not sitting on it when we tighten it. So 10 clicks or so, just enough to get it off. It doesn't have to be a certain set amount. Now when we cinch this down to each other, okay. Now we want to make sure that we have the same amount of clicks we took it out that we can go back in. Perfect. All right, so let's go ahead and get our wrench out of there. Spacer retainer out of there. Spring cup lined over the nut, not sitting on there like on the side, lined over it. Get our compression tool off of there. Great. Now, believe it or not, we are ready just to put this thing back in action by sliding this tube up on here, running it on tight. Now, when we go ahead and snug this down with our outer tube, we'll put it back in the soft jaws, put a wrench on it, and then we'll reset our preload and compression settings to what they were before. Okay. Now our compression adjuster, we're going to go ahead and back it all the way out. Like I said, we set it to 50 clicks, which is OE spec. So now from there, we're going to just base set it right in the middle, 25 clicks. 5. Well, 10, 15, 20, 25. Now our preload adjuster that's on the top for our spring tension. Now remember, when we tighten this, this just moves this tube on the inside to push more tension on our spring. So while we're tightening this down, it's actually moving this piece on here on the side is what's moving. So, and there's also lines on the side where we can set it. There's one line, 2 lines visible. Back down to the second line. Good to go. I'll go ahead and cinch this cap down. Whoever had these on before, I broke my tool. I do have the correct wrenches for these, but the one I had, I ended up snapping it trying to get it off. So I don't know who ran these on before, but they were way too tight. So, all right, with that cinched up, get this out of our vise. We'll give it a final spray down and a wipe. Some brake cleaner. Make sure we don't have any fluid on here. Grease, debris. Clean our lower tube again. We'll give it a couple cycles by hand. Make sure we're not puking oil for some reason. We had some debris in there or anything like that. So with this on the floor, give ourselves a couple cycles. Feels great. And then we'll check our rod here on the bottom to make sure we don't have anything, left over. So it's looking good so far. That about does it for how to rebuild these things. Sorry for the lengthiness, but for somebody that actually wanted to know, that's how you can do it start to finish. forks came out great. Front end knock is completely gone. And I don't feel anything. I did feel when he brought it in, but don't feel it anymore. Got his brake pads on there. A couple off-camera things we did. Had to replace a headlight bulb for him. And he's got one of these aftermarket shift indicators. So we checked the wiring on that. Seems to be okay. Believe it or not, we're going to take this thing down the street. Cautiously getting out of the driveway. I don't let anything go out of here without obviously testing the brakes and stuff like that, especially when we have the front end apart.
And a few moments later, dressed in his finest...
Woo! Man! Yep. Well, guys, any season is riding season. If you just believe. A little cold out there, a little wet, but we don't let anything leave the shop without personally testing it first. At least, especially on these street bikes. With me having the front end apart, make sure we ain't got no wobbles. We'll let this thing finish drip drying. Man, we're starting to stack parts over here in the corner. Sidewinder shifter. We got a standalone fuel tank. That's I'm gonna be putting my Camaro on the bottle this season. So I got some drag shocks for the rear. We're stacking some parts. Stay tuned if you think you guys would want to see that. Let me know down below. You guys want to see some Camaro stuff, some car stuff. If not, I'll keep it to myself. But also let me know, guys, what you think of the videos. Good, bad, ugly, any feedback's good feedback from me. So with my feet propped up, it's time to say goodbye on this one. Give this customer a call, let them know it's ready for pickup. Thanks for all for tuning in. See you.